You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits. A podcast that encourages you to love more in your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and I have 3 pets, 2 cats and a dog, who love to be no more than 2 inches away from me in distance at any given time. In fact, while I record this, Ferguson is on his kitty condo to my left, and Finnegan is at my feet to the right. Rooney, on the other hand, is a little bit more independent. But you might say, it sounds like you're close. And that often works for friendships. We become friends with those in which we are familiar and close in proximity. But how else is closeness defined? Because after our discussion of trust, which was the last episode, and then this episode focusing on another core friendship concept of closeness, we can start to dive into what happens when friendships start to dissolve. And that'll be coming in 2020. So until then, let's explore closeness and friendship. And to begin, I really like this quote by Rumi. Quote, "Friend, our closeness is this. Anywhere you put your foot, feel me in the firmness under you." End quote. So the question starts with, what is closeness? And certainly there are a number of ways in which academics and pop culture has defined closeness. Early on, like early 1958, Hyder, as cited by Aron and colleagues in 1997, referred to closeness as, quote, the extent to which a particular person and some other person are seen to be in a unit relation, end quote. Certainly, you can see this in romantic relationships when they're dating and they have their arms around each other, they're walking holding hands, and from the outsiders, it can be a fun parlor game at the movies to be like, those people are a couple. They appear to be close. But we can also see this in friendship. And one of the quick ways to do that when, say, we're tweens and teens is those Best Forevers necklaces. Oh, I just said Best Forevers because that's the name of the podcast. But it's Best Friends necklaces, whatever. If you want a Best Forevers necklace sticker, let me know. Email me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. Because we got them. But we had those best friends necklaces, right? And I think it's really cool to see now how they've grown into, you can get 8 pieces of a pizza. If there's a large group of you, you can be like the cheese to someone's macaroni. You can be the peanut butter to someone's jelly. Like, they've gotten really creative. But that might have been a sign like, oh, you have a necklace that says best. Who's the other person who has friends? You must be really close. You must be best friends. Now, when I was in graduate school, so moving up into adulthood, young adulthood, emerging adulthood in our 20s, Tara, who has been on the podcast several times before, her and I lived together, and we called our Wi-Fi system when we lived together Alysa, which is the celebrity couple version of our name where we put our 2 names together. Alysa and Tara is Alysa. And we did that as a joke because people would send us invites and holiday cards as one unit. We would get one even though we were individual people. And we lived together and were friends, so outsiders saw us as a unit. They saw us as close enough to be like, hey, I think if we give this invite to Tara, she'll tell Alysa. Or, hey, Alysa, when you're done reading that holiday card, be sure Tara gets to see it as well. And I think you see that a lot in romantic couples, but it can also happen to people who are really close in friendship. And then in adulthood, when you think about closeness, who do you invite or ask? And now it's a much more elaborate process. I think that would be a really interesting episode about weddings and friendship, because when we're adults and we're communicating our care for another person, it can communicate to other people that we're close by having them stand up as our best man, our best woman, our maid of honor, our man of honor, all the different versions that exist. And just being in the wedding party could indicate to other people that this is someone who is close to those getting married. So even more, in 1989, Bershad and her colleagues saw closeness as dealing with behavioral interaction. And this included such things as amount of time spent together, shared activities, which you would have to do when you share time together, and then mutual influence, meaning that you have some impact on each other's life. And I know that Bershad takes a view as closeness being linked to interdependency, which we'll talk about in a little bit. A key here then is proximity. And that is, I always talk about this idea of mere exposure in my relational classes. And this is sort of a fun social psychology concept that we talk about in communication as well. And mere exposure is where you find yourself where your crush is, and the more that someone sees you, they become familiar, and then they'll be attracted to you because of that mere exposure. So sometimes all we have to do is show up outside someone's class after seventh period, or stand by their locker before homeroom, or whatever the case is. And that proximity, the idea is that we are going to be more attracted to someone who we are comfortable and familiar with. And so think about all the ways in which we make friendships in life. I mean, the most basic way we make friendships perhaps is our neighbors. Well, I'd even go further and say siblings and cousins, because obviously you're in the same house and the same family. But then it's like neighbors. You can only go 4 houses down. You can't cross the street. You can spend time with this person, but when the lights come on, you have to be home. And that was based all on proximity and not necessarily whether or not you liked the people. And some of my favorite friends from proximity were the Prescott sisters, who lived a couple houses down from me. And they got this deck on the front of their house. So we used to make up dances to Vanilla Ice, and their dad used to do the 4th of July fireworks in the street, and they were super fun. So I think even if they live further away, that I would want to be friends with them, but that's not always the case. But one of the things is saying closeness might have something to do with geographic closeness, or that you have frequent interactions, in which at this time when Brashide was talking about this in 1989 would have all been face-to-face. We're not even thinking about technology. But so many of us have long-distance friendships now, and this might suggest we're unable to have close long-distance relationships. And I don't know if that's what Brashide was trying to get at. I don't think she might have realized how far technology would take us. And so I really like this quote I found online. Closeness has nothing to do with distance. And I think Amy Jeanette Johnson would agree. So more recent work in 2009 by Amy Johnson and her colleagues focuses more on what we might say is psychological closeness of long-distance friends, being marked by things such as, quote, acceptance, understanding, trust, keeping in touch, and continuing to influence each other's decisions over distance, end quote. Whereas friends in that close geographic distance and close proximity are more likely to focus on things like, quote, frequent of contact, ease of interaction, and practical support, end quote. So when you're having a bad day, a friend who's in close proximity can bring you soup. They can do that because they live in close distance, but someone who's far away, who's close to you, might have to do something even more intentional than bringing the soup over. They could find a delivery service that brings you soup. They could Venmo you money to get soup. They could do something else to provide you with the support when they can't do the things that people in town can do for you. So according to the November 2019 New York Times article, How to Have Closer Friends and Why You Need Them by Emma Petit cites Dr. Serena Chen, quote, a key to close friendship is intimacy, and a big part of intimacy is being able to be fully yourself and be seen and understood by others. When people close to us don't get us, it's undermining to intimacy, end quote. So I think most people say, well, if someone's close to you, shouldn't they get you? And I completely understand that. But if we're thinking about closeness in terms of all relationships, we might assume that a parent or a sibling might be close. They are in proximity, but they might not be close in any other way. So I think that it's not only, it could be physical closeness or not, but what's maybe more important is that we are seen, heard, and that people accept us and get us. So intimacy often is thought of when referring to sexual activity. Like people are like, oh, they got intimate. However, intimacy means so much more. From the 2002 chapter, The Nature of Intimacy and the Intimate Relationships book by Brehm, Miller, Perlman, and Campbell, the nature of intimacy includes 6 factors. And I think these all make a lot of sense as we move towards closeness, right? So the first factor in the nature of intimacy is having some sort of knowledge of this other person. And that's where we self-disclose, we share information, and we know each other's histories. So to feel like you have an intimate relationship or a close friendship, there has to be that risk of sharing information that we talked about in the trust episode. The second factor is that we care for our close friends, and that means feelings of or communication of affection, verbally, non-verbally, or otherwise. Okay? Now, this is something that Berscheid understands as part of her definition of closeness, and that is interdependence. And that's the idea when your lives are intertwined or meshed together, and so your influence on each other, even in the littlest ways, can have a large impact. And so it's one person's behaviors impact someone else's. So if you have a tradition of going on vacation every July and your friend decides that they're going to do their vacation with their family in August, that obviously impacts your vacation plans. And that isn't necessarily small, but that's the idea, is that we are continuously influencing each other back and forth. And so that leads into the fourth factor, which is mutuality. And this goes back to Alysa, me and Tara and Alysa. They see themselves as an us or an Alysa versus me and her, right? And I think that's any sort of, even if you go over to dating relationship, for example, that you have a turn in that relationship where you start to see each other as a couple versus two individual people. And that is also the case for friends. And our good old friend trust is factor number 5, that we expect that our friend will treat us fairly and honorably in all the ways in which we discussed in the last episode, that we need trust in our friendships or they're probably not going to go very far, as we'll talk about more when we get into the episodes in 2020. The final factor as it relates to the nature of intimacy is commitment, and that we expect our partnership to continue. Now, if you're thinking about this generally, that commitment is often referred to in terms of romantic partners. And commitment is, I don't necessarily think that we have big ceremonies like weddings in which we commit to our friendships, but we can do it in a lot of different ways. Again, going back to the tweens and presenting the necklace of best and friends to each other, that would be a sign of commitment. But I think a lot of times we do expect that our friendships will continue. And so the semester just ended and I'm on winter break. Woohoo! 4 weeks of enjoyment and focusing on all the cool things that we'll discuss in 2020 on this podcast. But one of the things that I was talking about with my students as we transition again, there was graduation. And I always try to tell my students that you can't expect friendships just to continue past college. This is a time when, if you have that chance to go to college, you have the opportunity to make more friends than maybe any other time in life. And so if you want it to continue past graduation, past Central Michigan University, past Mount Pleasant, Michigan, then you have to talk to your friends about it. And so there is this commitment level, but then the question might be, how much do we put into it, right? And so that leads us into a couple other thoughts about closeness. In a New York Times article in 2019, Emma Petit talks to Sue Johnson, who's the head of the International Center for Excellence in Emotionally Focused Therapy. And Dr. Johnson talks about the number of friendships, if you will. Quote, when it comes to friendship, we put quantity over quality. So it becomes a question of how many people will show up to your birthday party. And the real question is, if you can open up and be vulnerable with a few of those folks, are you willing to tune in emotionally and respond if they each reach for you? End quote. So it could be, how many friends do I have on Facebook? How many friends show up to my birthday party? How many friends wish me a happy birthday on Facebook? But it comes down to, how many of those people do I see myself as close to? And I would want to share things with them, and they would want to share things with me. And all those people, if 60 people show up to my birthday party, am I able to tune in emotionally and respond to each of them? And that's why reciprocation is a key element to creating intimacy and closeness, is that it's not one-sided, that you are close friends if you are both putting in intentional work. And that a lot of us might consider that, oh, I don't have a lot of friends. Well, if you have one friend, you're rich in friendship beyond a lot of people, what they might have ever in their life. And so we have to think about, it is quality over quantity, although a lot of times we might think quantity over quality. And so our good friend of the podcast, Bill Rollins, who is on my 1-year anniversary episode, Friendship Matters. He is an amazing communication researcher, and I would say the godfather of friendship, at least in communication discipline, if not beyond. He's such a joy to talk to, but his work is also very impactful. And he talked to Julie Beck in the 2015 Atlantic article, and he talked about 3 expectations of a close friend that people describing and valuing across the entire lifespan. So we can think about over life, what are people expecting? And there are 3 expectations according to Bill Rollins. He says, 1, somebody to talk to, 2, somebody to depend on, and 3, somebody to enjoy. These expectations remain the same, but the circumstances under which they've accomplished change over time, right? And so I think this is important to think about, is that this is how we define close friendship. Can we talk to them? Can we depend on them? And can we enjoy time with them? And those are things that might be able to happen face-to-face, and then probably to Amy Johnson's joy at long-distance relationships and friendships as well. So then it comes a question of, if we have an idea of what closeness is, and the way I see it is that there are a lot of things that can go into it. Some of the things that we talked about was being seen as a unit, being seen as close friends, that behavioral interaction, which can be face-to-face, or it can be over all the technology we have now, right? That we are dealing with psychological closeness, and that intimacy is a large part of it, and that it has to be quality over quantity with reciprocation, and that these 3 expectations are important to what closeness is. But then how do we measure whether or not we're in a close friendship? Now, there are a couple different ways that the communication field and psychology field have done. And I like to share those because although I know it's kind of super academic-y, I also think they're things that we can use to apply to our life. Or we can then further extend and say, this is how I do it in my life. And I would love to know how you determine closeness in your friendships. And you can always get a hold of me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com or bestforeverspod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere. Tweet at me, let me know, email me, because I think although there are academic ways to do it, there are a lot of different ways that might be important for us to discuss on this podcast. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways in which to measure closeness. And the first one is what academics call lay people's definitions, which means all of you, people who are not the researchers, right? And this is some work that I've used in a lot of my friendship research over the years, my dissertation, my thesis, so on and so forth. And that is the work of Mansour in 1992 and Parks and Floyd in 1996. And in both these studies, what they wanted the research participants to do was describe friendship intimacy in the case of Mansour, and Parks and Floyd closeness and intimacy. And so in those studies, then the participants self-reported what they would see as intimacy or closeness in friendships. So in the Mansour study from 1992, this is what people reported as how they knew that they were in a close friendship: self-disclosure, emotional expressiveness, unconditional support, physical contact, trust, sharing activities, and sexual contact. Now, you're probably going, excuse me, sexual content? I thought you said that intimacy was more than that. It is more than that, because you can have sex without intimacy and intimacy without sex. In this particular study, they were looking at cross-sex and same-sex friendships. It is very well possible to have sexual contact in those relationships, but wouldn't be a top marker of friendship, obviously, because then that blurs the lines into friends with benefits, romantic relationships, and so much more that we can talk about in another episode. Now, in the Parks and Floyd study from 1996, the participants reported as the top markers of closeness and intimacy was self-disclosure, help and support, shared interests and activities, and comfort and ease of interaction. And now, one of the things that I find particularly interesting about these lay people's definitions is they are in line with most markers of friendship. Now, we just discussed that sexual contact wouldn't be, but self-disclosure, support, shared interests, activities, any of those things, that's what marks friendship. And so in some ways, I think that lay people have just supported some of the research that has been done for years, right? And that's what's important to them as well. And so I'd love to know, how do you define closeness of a friendship? Are there particular activities or markers or things that people say or do with each other that would indicate that you're close? Does it require a conversation? Is it a feeling? How do you do it? I would love to know. The second way in which to measure closeness in the academic world is the Relational Closeness Inventory, also known as the RCI. And this is done by Burchide and her colleagues in 1989, and it focuses on measuring closeness through interconnected activities. And she is very much tied to the idea of interdependency, that being meshed together. And so the inventory, which is in my show notes, and you can take it online if you want, or you can just, I'm going to run through some of the questions so you get a sense of what it is. Now, some of the questions it asks, like what type of friendship or what type of relationships, so in this case, it'd be friendship, how long you've known each other, things like that. Then it's ask questions like, during this past week, what is the average amount of time per day that you spend alone with this person in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening? Right, so those are the first questions asked about hours and minutes. So that idea of that face-to-face time is really going to maybe mark closeness for people. So then the next part is a list of activities that people might engage in over the course of 1 week, and I'm reading from the survey. So for each of the activities listed, please check all of those that you have engaged in alone with your friend in the past week. Check only those activities that were done alone with this person, not done with a group of people. And so it's a long list. I'm going to give you a few. Did laundry, prepared a meal, watched TV, attended a non-class lecture or presentation, went to the grocery store, went for a walk, went to a museum art show, went on a trip like a vacation or weekend, cleaned house or apartment, went to church or religious function, worked on homework, discussed things of a non-personal nature, went to a movie, ate a meal, went to a bar, visited family, went to a department book, hardware store, etc., played cards or a board game, attended a sporting event, exercised. I love their examples of exercise from 1989, jogging and aerobics. You've dated yourself, Burchide. Wilderness activity like hiking, fishing, went dancing, went to a party, etc. So there's a whole list. There's some that I didn't read that might be more prevalent to romantic relationships, family, etc. But you can respond to this in terms of friendship as well. Then the next part of it gets at the amount of influence that your friend has in your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so on a scale of 1 to 7, I strongly disagree to I strongly agree. My friend does not influence everyday things in my life. My friend influences important things in my life. My friend influences the way I feel about myself. My friend influences the basic values that I hold. My friend influences the way I feel about the future. My friend influences and contributes to my overall happiness. My friend influences how I spend my free time. My friend influences what I watch on TV. Well, if you're friends with me on Facebook or you follow me on Twitter, you know I'm always trying to put TV on other people. In that case, I'm TV friends with everyone. There's a whole list. That was just a few examples. And so looking at that interdependency, like how does one influence the other? So then my question for you might be, in what ways do you do things that communicate closeness? What activities do you do with your friends that communicate closeness to you? Much like the list above, is there something on there that you would add or delete based on what I said? And in what ways do your friends influence each other or influence you? Because that might be where closeness comes in, and focusing on the definitional part of it that focuses on interdependency. Now, the last one I've talked about before, but it's the inclusion of other and self-scale, because I use this a lot in my research. And I found this quote on yourtango.com that really, I felt like fit very well here. And that is, quote, "In my friend, I find a second self," end quote, Isabel Norton. So Aron and colleagues in 1992 developed the inclusion of other and self-scale known as the IOS. It's a one-item pictorial measure focusing on, quote, people's sense of interpersonal connectedness. So this is a visual item, and I will have it in my show notes that you can link to it, and then I'll also post it on social media once the episode releases so you can see. Now, basically, it's 7 sets of circles. One circle represents you, and one circle represents the other person in your life. So in this case, one circle represents you, and the other circle represents your friend. And so you start with 1 to 7. 1 has no overlap whatsoever. 2 has little overlap. 3 has some overlap. 4 has equal overlap. 5 has strong overlap, 6 is very strong overlap, and 7 has the most overlap. And so the idea is that this scale gets at your perception of closeness. How will you describe you and your friend? What set of circles best reflects your friendship? Now, maybe no overlap would reflect the person that sits next to you in class, or the person that works at the front desk in your office, or whatever the case is, or someone you interact with at the dentist's office. Acquaintances, right? And that the idea is that maybe most overlap would be your closest friend. But that's the thing, is it comes down to a perception, and that some people will describe a 7 for their friendship, and their friend might describe a 4. And so one of the things you have to be careful, I do have to give a warning, although this might be a fun parlor game when you bring in another person to do it, but the thing of the matter is that people might have different perceptions, and that can be hurtful if you see number 7 most overlap with your partner, your best friend, and they're like, actually, I see 3, some overlap, and you're like, ouch. And so it's a perception, but if they perceive to be close to you, then they are close to you in their mind. So that's one of the things, is you do have to be careful with this, but it is a reliable measure according to research, and it's something that I use a lot in my studies because it's a quick way to measure how people feel connected to other people. So then the question becomes here is, how close do you perceive each of your friendships to be? So you could use this yourself, again, warning on bringing someone else in, but you can use it yourself and think about, like, how close do I see these people in my life? And maybe it's a good way to reflect, to think about who your closest friends are. Now, one of the things is that now that we know what closeness is and how we measure it, it can come down to, how do we gain more closeness? How can we request it? And so in Beck's 2015 Atlantic article, becoming closer with friends requires time and being intentional, which is a word that we've heard a lot today besides closeness and intimacy, but the idea is that we have to be more intentional in our friendships. So cited in Beck's article is Dr. Sue Johnson, who states, quote, "We think about relationships as thing that happens to us, but the truth is," let me say it again, quote, "We think about relationships as things that happen to us, but the truth is that we make them happen," end quote. So here are 5 ways to become closer. One of the first things that you can do to gain more closeness is to create a foundation of security. And there is and I don't know how this acronym would be stated aloud, so I'm going to call it CARP. And that is consistency, availability, reliability, responsiveness, and predictability. So being consistent, making yourself available, being counted on, following through. Responsive means, if someone asks you something, you respond. If someone texts you, you respond to them. And then predictability, that they can predict what you'll be like as a friend. So that would be the first thing, is CARP brings you a foundation of security. The second thing is paying close attention. Quote, "Intimacy starts with attention and attunement," end quote. And I think that comes down to not just paying attention to who your friends are and what they're saying. It's, you have to listen, you have to pay attention, and we're often busy with our phones. We live in a world where we're supposed to multitask, and I think that intimacy, if it's something that you're intentional about and you want to pay more attention to, would be putting the phone down if your friend is talking about something important, or just putting your phone down so you can assess whether or not it's something serious or something a little bit more silly or whatever, that you have to eyes up, ears open type of situation, that doing our best to pay attention, and that I like this idea of being attuned with other people, that because we're paying attention, we might be able to note some differences in people's behaviors and then provide them support. The third way in which to become closer is let yourself be known. So one of the things in terms of the definition of closeness is this idea that I'm accepted for who I am, people get me and they hear me and they see me, well, then I have to let myself be known. And the Beck article talks about stop pretending to be cooler or smarter than you are. Let people know that you binge watch Honey Boo Boo. And I'm like, I don't necessarily binge watch that. But yeah, I talk about the things that I like that are probably seen as respectable and things that I like that people are like, ew, you like that? I'll be like, yeah, I do. It's amazing. Right? So it's helping people understand and accept you by sharing who you are with them. And as we know, with the quote from before from Bill Rowlands and from the trust episode, that there is a level of risk that comes to it, but we're not going to be able to build closeness or achieve trust if there is no risk in letting ourselves be known to other people. The next way in which to become closer is to take your friends on a test drive. And now I don't condone secret tests just to prove your friend would do something or wouldn't do something, but this is more leaning towards that you ask your friend for help to see how reliable they are. And at the same time, you build closeness. So if there's something that you think is smaller that you can handle on your own, you might lean out for support, lean in for that support, lean on the friend to see what they're like in situations, and that can help you determine if you're going to have a close friendship or not. And again, by doing those things, like asking for support and receiving support, you will be building closeness as you go. And then finally, accept that closeness isn't one size fits all. Now, we all need closeness, but that's going to vary by people, just much like the perception is going to be very different. That doesn't mean you're any less close with your friend. They just see it differently. Even more, individuals can participate in what John Gottman calls bids. According to the Gottman.com webpage, quote, Gottman refers to bids as the fundamental unit of emotional communication. These bids can be small or big, verbal or nonverbal. They are requests to connect. They might take the form of an expression, question, or physical outreach. This task was also suggested in the 2017 Beck's article in The Atlantic because of that request for connection. We're looking for that closeness. We are making requests. And so thinking about John Gottman's bids, which are normally used to refer to romantic relationships, we can apply to here as friendships. So according to that webpage, bids are often purposely subtle because people are afraid to be vulnerable and put themselves out there. But one of the things that you can do, there are 3 ways to respond to a bid. If you're trying to build closeness, then one of the things that you can do is turn towards your friend, and that is acknowledging the bid. So a bid might be something like, hey, do you want to do something tonight? And say, no, I don't even know what that is, like not paying attention. But if you acknowledge a bit, oh my God, that'd be so much fun to do something tonight, but I'm busy. Can we do it tomorrow night? So the idea is you're not completely turning them down, or you're paying attention and you see it as a bid for connection and you respond to it in a way that shows that you want that connection as well. Okay? Turning away is ignoring or missing the bid. So that goes back to if we're not paying attention or attuned, then we're going to miss these bids that are subtle and can be in verbal and nonverbal, small or big. So turning away is just being oblivious to them going on at all. So if we are being intentional with our friendships and we are intentionally making connections or trying to make connections, then we will be paying more attention to those bids. And then finally, turning against, and that is rejecting the bid in an argumentative or belligerent way. Like, why would I want to go out with you tonight? And it's like, oh, gosh, okay, sorry, I guess you didn't want to go out tonight. And that can really start to harm the relationship if all requests for connection are denied. Now, if you're like, I just don't want to be friends with this person anymore, then that might be the case that it's time to dissolve, which we'll talk about friendship breakups in the future. So according to Beck's in 2017, Rollins, our friend Bill, doesn't like bids, but does like the idea of rituals. Now, he sees bids as more economical and saying, like, if you do this, I do that. and he doesn't see friendship in that way. He sees friendships as an ongoing conversation where you can co-author the relationship together. And in that case, he likes the idea of rituals. And so those are the things that people do together, and it becomes something that is a marker of their specific friendship. So what are things that you do with your friends that you would consider rituals? Rollins recommends, quote, taking the risk to express to someone that you like to do something with them outside of situations where you're required to spend time together. And in that case, you can create a ritual by making that request to see them outside. And you don't have to just only do bids, and it doesn't have to be shut down. It's something we can build together. Further, the Beck article reports research that found, quote, the more points of connection you have with someone, the stronger the friendship will be, end quote. So if your work friends, ask them to hang out outside of work and they will help build the friendship and likely friendship closeness. And so whether you take Rollins' point of view and you support rituals, or you take Gottman's point of view with bids, the idea is that if you only have one connection with someone, that might not be as strong of a relationship. If you only have one thing in common, that might not be as strong of a friendship. But if you turn toward them, you bid, or you turn towards them, or you start to create a ritual or start to write the story together, you co-author that story together, then you'll start hanging outside of work and you start doing things together and you'll find more connections. And that's where you're going to find a closer relationship if you can spend that time together. Now, I know that I'll go back to this idea of geographic closeness or psychological closeness. And if you have geographic closeness, you can also have psychological closeness. And if you're not geographically close, you can still be psychologically close. Bids can happen online. You can spend time together on the phone, talking to each other on the, via FaceTime. Like, there's lots of ways to create that psychological closeness, even if you're not physically close. And so why does it all matter, right? Why should any of this matter at all? And closeness matters because, according to Beck in 2017, quote, friendships often face more hurdles to intimacy than other close relationships, end quote. And we know we have basic needs for belonging, acceptance, and inclusion. And so, not surprisingly then, according to Petty's New York Times 2019 article, close friendships are necessary for optimal health and well-being. Dr. Serena Chen is quoted in the same article as stating, quote, when we are intimate with another person, we can experience positive mental and physical reactions in our body, mind, and heart, end quote. So friendships have hurdles, but there's many health benefits. It comes down to this one question. Who prioritizes their friendships as important in their lives? Do you prioritize your friendships as important? I would wager a guess that perhaps you are starting to, or you do because you're listening to a friendship podcast. But the idea is that there's good benefits to come from it, but we're already struggling in the friendship realm, right? That we have to be more intentional. We have to do more, but we're not going to do the more if we're not going to prioritize our friendships. So Rollins, as cited by Beck in 2017, indicates that we form habits that impacts our ability to make the type of friends we'd like to have in our lives. So if we don't prioritize our friendships, then we're not going to make the kind of friends that we want to have, right? Because we then create habits that don't include friends. We don't have rituals with friends. We don't have anything with friends other than maybe fond memories because we're not prioritizing it and we're not making space for our friends. So as we age, making friends can be even more difficult than when we were younger, right? We have the neighborhood friends, we had school friends, we had people who lived near us in our residence halls if we went to college. And the thing about it is, no matter even if you've had the opportunity to make friends at a younger age in life, friendships are at the bottom of the relationship hierarchy, and they're not considered just in general, collectively by society as something that we should prioritize. And so we may not have a lot of time for our friends even now as adults because we've created these habits, or that we spent more time saying like, well, we're going to spend time with our family, we're going to spend time with our children, we're going to spend time with work, but we might have friendship as the last thing that we're going to do or that we have to do. And so because of that, because as adults it's harder to make friends and we might have created some bad habits, that we might not have a lot of time for our friends, and we don't expect any time from them either. But closeness matters because we need it. But even more, we have to be intentional about it. For example, quote, technology can make friendships shallower. Think quantity of friends, but it can also make them stronger depending on how intentionally you use it, end quote. So think quality. So whether you're at a great distance or not, whether you use technology or not, we have to be intentional because closeness matters to us as human beings. And we just are already have many setbacks when it comes to friendship. And so we have to clear those hurdles. We have to prioritize it, or we're never going to make the friends that we need that is going to help us achieve those health benefits of having close friends. So where are we going to next? Okay, so friendships are voluntary, which might be why they're at the bottom of the hierarchy. And according to Beck's 2015 article, quote, because we choose to get in friendships, I can choose to get out, end quote. So we intentionally create our friendships and then often have to be thoughtful about how we end them. But with closer friendships, it might be even harder to end those friendships when something has gone wrong. So we've discussed trust and closeness, which all play a role in some of the topics we'll venture into 2020, like friendship dissolution and breakups, loneliness and rejection, and more. But I want to hear from you. There's a lot to unpack here. I want to know how you would define closeness, what activities that you participate in with your friends that would communicate closeness. Do you measure closeness, or can you measure closeness from the image of the overlap circles? Like, how close are you with your friends? And do you prioritize friendship? Or is that still something that's difficult to do? Do we need to talk more about how we can prioritize? What does that look like in life when we have a partner and kids and a job and all these other responsibilities? How can then we prioritize friendship when we know we need them? We know we want them, right? Most of us want to have friends because even if we have all those other things, doesn't mean we don't feel lonely or that we don't need someone to support us in a different way. And so friendship matters. Friendship closeness matters. We have to focus on it, and we're going to take these ideas to help us have better friendships, but also to help us understand what happens when things go wrong in our friendships. So email me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com or find me online at bestforeverspod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And be sure to join the closed Facebook group for more friendship, memes, discussion, questions, and more. And so until next time, friends, think about what it means to be close to friends, because without our friends, who would we be? Listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hey guys, my name is Tara.
And my name is Jessica, and together we co-host the podcast, Three Spooked Girls.
If you love the paranormal
or murder,
join us every Monday as we tell our listeners about a new spooky tale or true crime case.
We'll have a special drink recipe each episode picked out by me for you to enjoy while we scare the hell out of you.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever the hell else you listen to podcasts.
Come hang out with us and get your spooky on.